Oh, hello there. You just caught me writing up some notes. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the most effective, the most efficient way of writing up notes while you're in a lecture. And this is going to help you retain information, and it's also going to help you with your assessment. So we've just got 3 steps to go. Let's get started. Before we start talking about what you should do, I'd like to talk briefly about what you shouldn't do. And that is, when you're sitting in a lecture, don't spend your time writing down what is on the PowerPoint slides. This ultimately isn't going to be much use to you. You're going to get those slides in advance or afterwards. And if you spend your time trying to write that down, not only are you going to get hand cramp from trying to collect all of that information, but what you're going to actually miss is what the lecturer is saying. And that is the gold dust. And that's what you want to retain. So when you're in a lecture, don't just write down what is on the PowerPoint slides. Now let's get to step number 1. So the first thing that I would recommend that you do, if the lecturer releases the PowerPoint slides in advance of the lecture taking place, then you should download them. You can either download and then print them off. I really like having physical copies of things to write on. But if you don't want to print it off for whatever reason, or you don't really like handwriting, or you prefer to use it on your computer, then download it and save it onto your desktop. Now, the reason for this is that it means that you're actually going to take notes directly onto this piece of paper or onto the PowerPoint presentation in the notes section. That means that you don't have to concentrate on what's written on these slides, but what you're going to be focusing on is writing down and populating these areas here. Now, if the lecturer doesn't release the lecture slides in advance, then you can either speak to them and see if it's an option, or alternatively, I'll talk about the other means that you can do to get around this to still make notes effectively. But step 1 is to download and print off or keep the PowerPoint slides for that lecture. All right, at this point, we are now on to step number 2, and you have got your PowerPoint slides downloaded or you've got them printed off. And your job now is to take notes. Now, the simplest way of explaining this is that your job when you're in a lecture is to try and write down as much as possible of what the lecturer is actually saying. So when I'm lecturing, the PowerPoint slides behind me are a little prompt. There's something to remind me what to talk about, but they themselves are only the starting point. The most important stuff is going to be what the lecturer says and how they explain the points that are actually on there. So if there's a 1-word bullet point, let's say it's talking about hierarchy, then that's fine. We know that the lecturer is going to talk about that, but what your job is to do is to write down all of those contextualizing factors, all of the stories. Perhaps they're suggesting advice for the assessment as well, and reminding you of what you could write about, what you should write about, and of the sorts of things that could be of interest. So treat it like a game and try and write down as much as possible of what the lecturer is saying. There's a few reasons why this is really helpful. Firstly, it will help you to stay concentrated within the lecture. So I find for me, if I'm sitting in a lecture for any more than 20 minutes and I'm not doing something, I'm not writing anything down, my brain will just drift off. And as soon as it drifts off for a couple of minutes, I find it really hard to come back into the room. So for me, sitting in a lecture and just listening, I don't really find that I retain very much after the first 20 minutes. But if I'm writing it down, it means that I'm constantly keeping myself, forcing myself to be engaged. And it means that I'm really listening to the stories that the lecturer is telling. And if you look at any research on the increase in brain retention that happens when you go from listening to writing, it is absolutely colossal. It will help your brain encoding process, which is the bit that helps you to actually understand information. It will also help you to make sure that you're keeping up with the content. And lecturers, we love to talk about assessment throughout modules. We love to talk about what's going to happen, or how this particular point that I'm talking about, or this would be a good one to include in the assessment. If you're writing down those little bits and pieces that the lecturer is saying, then you're going to be able to remember those, and you're going to be able to return to those a little bit later on. So in the second section, what I would aim to end up with for me is for my notes to look a little something like this. So whilst I'm not actually annotating the PowerPoint slides on this side, I'm bringing out the main points here. If you like stationery, this is perfect. You can use all sorts of colored pencils and pens and whatever you like, but it is a really, really useful way of taking notes. Now we're going to move on to step number 3, which is the final and quick stage. So now we are on to step number 3. You have downloaded the PowerPoint slides. You have taken notes on them, and you've either taken notes on them physically or you've written notes into the PowerPoint notes section. Great. What do you now do with that? Do you just leave it there? You could do, but the chances are that bit of paper or that PowerPoint slide, it's quite hard to come back to because there's lots of little bits of information. It's probably quite scrawled. It's probably quite messy. So your job after your lecture, and this should take no more than 20 minutes or half an hour, your job is now to type those notes up nicely. So for study unit 1, let's say, you've got the lecture, you've got the PowerPoint slides, and then after that, you can write yourself up a document that summarizes all of the notes that you've written down. What that means is that when you come back, when you're writing up your assessment and you think, oh, what was it that came up in study unit 1? You've not only got the PowerPoint slides, but you've now got all of those stories as well. And you could potentially record some of your thoughts about what other readings that relates to, or how else you might approach that in your assessment. But what this means is that week on week, you will have a record of what's been studied. You won't just go into a lecture, sit down and come out and 2 hours later think, wait, what was studied there? You're going to have it all right there, right in the front of your brain, but it's also going to be in a nice folder on your desktop as well. So that is the 3-stage process to taking notes in lectures. And remember, of course, if you found this useful, please do like this video, or please do leave a comment and let me know if there are any other academic skills refreshers that you would like to see. Enjoy your lectures, and it is great to be back.